All right, everyone, let's talk about the supplies that you're going to need to make the March Hare quilt top. So starting out, you are going to need some light Steam-A-Seam 2. So you can buy this by the yard. I sell it in my Dappled Things by Amy Etsy shop by the yard, so you can get it. This is 18 inches wide, and then you can get it in as many yards as you like. You can also purchase, and I have these available in my Etsy shop as well if this is something you would prefer. They sell their light Steam-A-Seam 2 in sheets. So these are 9 by 12-inch sheets. If you decide to go this route, you'll probably want to buy 2 packages, and for some of the larger things, mainly the leaves and stems of the tulips, you probably will need to use more than one sheet and butt pieces up next to each other in order to make them big enough to cover the entire background of the stems and leaves. Now, I love this product, and I chose it because it was my favorite product to work with as far as like a light fusible web. But just in case you don't have it readily available, or you already have something that you might like to try instead, a few other things that you could use would be Gloriani's Applique Wonder, or Heat and Bond, or maybe Flexi Fuse. I have used all of those, and the main reason I chose light Steam-A-Seam 2, well, the main reasons are it's repositionable. It repositions quite nicely. You can stick it down and then lift it and move it to another area. It doesn't leave sticky stuff behind, and it won't permanently stick to your background fabric until you fuse it with an iron. Applique Wonder also does that, and that's a nice product. However, it is very heavy. That is another reason I like the light Steam-A-Seam 2, because as the name says, it is a light product. Steam-A-Seam also sells a heavier weight product, but this is their lighter version. If you use steam on this when you fuse your fabric to it, it takes a lot of the sticky aspect of it away, so that when you're quilting it doesn't gum up your needle. My experience is you will get a little bit of gummy stuff on your needle, but it's not nearly as bad as some other products. And then, with the Heat and Bond and the Flexi Fuse, those are awesome for applique, raw edge applique as well, but those will not stick to your surface, so you would have to lay them out and kind of just keep them in place the best you can until you fuse them down. So those are my recommendations, but light Steam-A-Seam 2 is definitely my favorite. Okay, so moving on, you're also going to need some paints or inks. So what I used was these Tsukaneko inks. Trying to get that into focus. There you go. I used these in 8 different colors. So I used Spring Green, Autumn Leaf, Vegas Gold, White, Midnight, Orchid Odyssey, Black Iris, and Truffle. Those are the 8 colors that I used, and I sell those as a kit on my Etsy site. Other options, though, if you don't have these inks or you don't want to purchase them right now, you could use Set-A-Color paints. If you have some around, those work great. You might end up needing to thin them out just a bit to get them to kind of fuse with your fabric and not just sit on the top of it. Some other options, if you have Derwent Inktense pencils, I also really enjoy these. The core is ink or an ink-like product that you can draw onto your fabric, and then when you wet it with water or with a product like this No Flow, it activates it and helps it kind of seep or sink into your fabric. You can do really beautiful things with that, so if you have that, that's an option. Also fabric markers, so I have these Fabrico markers, spelled Fabrico, and the Inktense pencils are Inktense, I believe. Yes, they are. So those are just a few different options. Like I said, I like the inks the best, but whatever you have, you can probably make work. Alright, and then along with the inks, you're going to need something to apply them to your fabrics. Tsukaneko sells these Fantastics applicators for that. The ones you're going to want are the bullet tips, so they have this pointy tip on them. They come with caps, so if you keep them capped, they don't dry out and you can reuse them over and over again. I'm going to make a recommendation before you start out. Write the color number of your ink onto your Fantastics applicator. I recommend you don't write it right here on the outside of the applicator because it rubs off pretty easily. So what I discovered was if you get an ultra fine tip permanent marker, you can just write it on the end right there. I have one that I've done that with so that you can see it's totally doable, and if you do it there, it's not going to get rubbed off. And if you don't have applicators, or you're using, say, a set of color paint, or also to use the no flow if you're using that, you can use just a regular round tip brush, preferably a little bit of a point to it so you can do details. Nothing expensive. This one is just a cheap brush that I got at a craft store. Then the next thing that you're going to want to have is, I've already showed you this no flow, but this is a product that I highly recommend. There are a lot of fabrics out there that you might want to use for your background that might end up bleeding quite a bit when you use these inks or markers or paints. And this is to help prevent that. I have used it two different ways. I've painted it directly onto the background fabric and then painted this over the top, this Sukaneko ink, and it does prevent it from seeping out and weeping into your fabric. It does a great job that way. Another thing that I have done is just poured it directly into the bottle. I didn't pour a lot, I just shook it up, and it did thicken the ink to an extent where I could paint it on, and it kept it from bleeding into the background fabric. I do give directions in your pattern instructions for finding a background fabric that doesn't bleed, but it tends to be a challenge to find a fabric like that. So this, I added this in as a way to prevent that happening and to give you more options as far as what you use in your background, so that you can use something that maybe normally would bleed. Pellon Shape Flex. This is Pellon Shape Flex 101. This is basically a interfacing. It's an iron-on, so one side has a bumpy surface, that's the sticky fusey stuff, and then the other side is just going to look like a very loose woven fabric. This is for the background of your March Hare collage. I like this because we are going to fuse our hair to a background fabric that we're going to then cut about 1/4 inch all around the hair so that it creates an outline for the hair before we fuse it down to your background of your quilt top. Other products, though, if you don't have Pellon, would be a cotton voile. I believe that's how you say it. Also Pattern Ease, I have heard works quite nicely. You might try a Swedish tracing paper, or a really light muslin, or possibly even a batiste or a toile. Just something light, because you're going to be having lots of layers built up in some areas, and so you want to start out with a very light foundation that's not going to add to all those layers and make things thicker. That's something I forgot to mention with this light Steam-A-Seam too. Another reason that it's good that it's light, maybe I did mention this, but you do want something light that when you build up your layers in your collage is not going to get really thick and heavy and hard to stitch through and quilt through. Okay, so next let's talk about your detail scissors. I sell these in my Etsy shop as well. Many of you might have these. These are really a popular brand. They're the Karen K. Buckley Perfect Scissors. If you do applique, you probably do have some of these because the reason everyone loves them is they are awesome. They've got a nice sharp pointy tip, so that's good for cutting out your little details, and the edge is slightly serrated so it helps the scissors to get a grip. Also, the handles are silicone, so you're going to be doing quite a bit of cutting, and if you've got metal handles, those can start to make your fingers sore. So you can use these quite a bit longer without really feeling any soreness in your fingers. So that's another awesome thing about them. And then of course the cover is nice because it protects your scissors and other things from your scissors and that pointy tip. But if you have other detail scissors, something similar, as long as you've got a good pair of scissors that can cut well and cut out details well, then you'll be fine. You're good to go. Next thing I want to talk about is your marking pencils. So you're going to be tracing your pattern, your March Hare pattern, onto your background fabric. So that's what you're going to need a tracing pencil for. I recommend something that is semi-permanent, so it will stay on for as long as you need it to as you're painting and placing your your different elements on your background, but then will preferably wash away when all is said and done. I have this So-Line chalk pencil. These work nicely. It's got a very sharp chalk point. These are nice. They can wear away. You brush off your fabric if you're not careful. So if you use something like this, you'll just need to be careful. I like these. This is called a chalk pencil. These work. Try to get one that has a chalk surface to it rather than wax. This one actually I think is waxy. I thought it was my fabric marker. It might not be. But here we have one that's more of a chalky point. Another option, you could use Inktense pencils if you have them. So when I show you how to trace out the pattern onto your background fabric, one thing that's important is we're going to be drawing inside the lines of the different objects. So if you use an Inktense pencil to draw out your lines, you can come in with your all-purpose inks and paint over those lines, and those lines, as they get wet, of course, will get activated, and the color of the Inktense pencil will blend with the ink. So if you use Inktense pencils, just make sure that the colors you choose are going to blend nicely with whatever inks you paint over them, or paints that you paint over them, unless you're using only Inktense pencils, in which case choose the color that you want for that part of the design. So that is for marking your pattern onto the background. Next, you're going to need an iron, any type of a steam iron. You will want steam to fuse your light steam seam 2 to your fabric. Maybe a wool pressing mat that you can bring over to your work area. Those are really nice. This is a applique mat. This particular one is the Applifuse mat. It's a Gypsy Quilter product, and I sell these in my online store, in my Etsy shop. This one is a 12 by 18. I have a larger one that I got on Amazon. You can set this on top of the design, and you can lay out your applique pieces on top of it. For example, we're going to be fusing the parts of the tulips together. 2 parts at the top, we're going to fuse to the stems. So you can put this over your design, and then because you can see through this, use the lines on your design to lay your tulips out the way they need to be, and then fuse them down on top of this. This is non-stick and it's heat resistant. It won't melt if you are ironing on top of it. I also have a Teflon sheet that I will sometimes use. I might spread that. I put my applique on here and put my Teflon sheet on top of that, and then iron through all of them. I find that to be helpful if I'm worried about getting my iron gunked up. It's just an extra layer of protection. I will show you that when we get to that part in the class. There's just a few more things. A Sharpie. This is for marking out. Actually, what I have is a Bic Market, but you're going to want a permanent marker with a fine point about like that. That is for drawing your applique templates onto your steam-a-seam. I like this because you get nice thick lines that you can see through the steam-a-seam on both sides. Okay, you're going to want some kind of a clear tape. That's for assembling your pattern, and so it's a tiled pattern, and your applique templates are also tiled, and so you're going to need something clear like this to tape them together. You are going to want your pattern printouts. So you should, if you purchased the pattern, you'll receive 3 files. One is going to be your applique templates. There's 12 pages, and they're going to look something like this. So these are all the different parts of your raw edge applique, and also the outline of your hair. There's the back legs right there. So those are your applique templates. You're also going to want your pattern. So this, when you get it all assembled, is going to be, everything is going to be in here that you need to trace onto your background fabric, okay? Another of the files that you're going to need to print out is your pattern instructions. You actually don't have to print this out. You can just refer to it on a tablet or on your phone. This is what it looks like if you print it out. I printed all of these on regular copy paper on my printer at home. The quality of this image isn't as good as it could be if I had it professionally printed, but that doesn't really matter. You just need to be able to get a good enough print that you can basically see what's going on. My greens look incredibly yellow in this, but that really doesn't matter. I did not list this in the pattern, but you will want something to measure with. Okay, I've just got this ruler. You can use a measuring tape. We're going to be measuring the box in the printouts to make sure they print it out at the correct size. For cutting out your pieces of fabric, your background fabric and so on, you'll need some fabric scissors or a rotary cutter and a ruler so that you can cut out those. You will also definitely want to have on hand some kind of paper towels or rags, something for cleaning up messes and spills, because you will have some, okay? If you're wearing clothing that you need to protect, you want to make sure you have an apron or a smock to wear. So that covers the supplies and the materials. I am going to move into the fabrics next.